won't get on until 8:30. So I'm still about 5 more minutes. Alright, love you. See you after school. Or no, see you at lunch break.
Okay, look out, kitty. Everybody here? Can everybody hear? Hello?
Yes.
Great.
I can hear.
Great. Sorry about this. I had another meeting going and I turned on the wrong one, and I've been waiting for you all for 10 minutes and realized I was on the wrong meeting. So sorry about that. Good morning. Do you have some more of that cereal, Emma?
I do actually. I have a few bags.
Great. So, we will be doing another class like this on Thursday. So, I'll send you another invite for that. But today, what I'd like to begin is sort of a discussion of some of the movement theories and other aspects and philosophies that will really impact everything we do for the rest of the semester. And because we've lost 2 or 3 classes, I'm going to integrate it into the current assignment that has you conducting America. So I want to try a screen share. And so please let me know if you can see what I'm doing here. Can you see a whiteboard? Yes? Okay, great. So I'm going to jump right in, and this is being simultaneously recorded to YouTube, so it'll be available if you miss anything. But I'll kind of be periodically asking you some questions, so don't drift off. This could become, one of those lectures like Ferris Bueller sort of thing. But one of the really wonderful philosophies I think that we inherited, particularly in this country, are those from the ancient Greeks. Our form of government, philosophical kinds of points of view, and one of the things that the Greeks believed, and bear with me here for a minute. Sorry, I'm apologizing in advance for my drawing abilities, but so be it. Some of you have seen me do something like this before in terms of the philosophies. That's supposed to be a triangle. There we go. And so the Greeks believed in kind of 3 parts philosophically that made up the human being. And what the idea was is that the human being had within us various percentages of these 3 elements, and that is the body, the mind, and the spirit. And the amount of those relative to each other meant you were either in balance or we were out of balance. So if there was an overabundance of an athletic or a preoccupation with body-centered things, or it was a preoccupation with the intellect, or it was really those 2 things had to be in balance. And then if those 2 things were in balance, that third element, the spirit, which wasn't, as we think of it maybe today, a mostly religious connotation, but the spirit more like the soul or the embodiment of the things that were metaphysical that we couldn't see, that those things would be in perfect symmetry. And so that concept is, while not specifically choral conducting or conducting specifically, it is, I think, relevant to our discussions, particularly as we continue to talk about Delcros and Laban and some of their movement theories, because they were both about integration. And how many of you know something about Delcros? Has anybody heard of Delcros? Probably most of you have at least heard of him and the Delcros eurythmics. That's and there's an entire Delcro's system of music education, which is a three-part system, and that involves solfege, it involves movement, and it involves eurythmics, which is a movement that comes from the body. That all elements of music can then be sort of synthesized into these three things, which has its connotation in this ancient Greek philosophical triangle. So hopefully these are going to relate all to each other. So I'll clear this off, and I'd like you to, I don't have a handout for this, and there is, can you see this? Okay. That's the full name of Delcro's. We usually only talk about the last part of his hyphenated name. But one of the things I want you to know, kind of, you're not going to be tested on these dates, but to kind of place anybody in history, I think is interesting. And Delcro's was a music educator, and he sang, played the violin and the piano. And what he did in his education sort of journey, I guess, both as a teacher and just a very curious human being, he began to observe the manner in which elementary students particularly listened to and reacted to music. And he did this both in the context of his own classes and in the context of just kind of, walking around Paris or wherever he was at the time and watching how people were interacting with music and how they would react to it. And so the three concepts, because we're not studying Delcro's music education particularly, but these three terms, I don't know if you've heard of them or know them. There we go. So arrhythmic, if someone demonstrates arrhythmic abilities, if somebody demonstrates arrhythmic abilities, or somebody demonstrates eurythmic abilities. And I'll demonstrate those in just a second. But it's the last of the three that he observed that he then coined the term eurythmics. So I'm going to step back here to the keyboard, and hopefully you can hear this. So arrhythmic would be something like this. Something that is disjunct rhythmically, that doesn't really have any connection. In terms of an example of a pianist, it might sound something like this. And so the individual doesn't have a concept of even basic rhythmic linear alignment. Arrhythmic is what maybe some of you who teach have observed in a few of your students, if you teach an instrumental student or you teach a singer, and that is they are absolutely accurate rhythmically. Okay, and that is like filling in the dots or connecting the lines, or perhaps imposing from the outside using a rhythmic structure or a melodic one. So eurythmic. Hello?
Sorry, Dara is trying to get into the meeting.
Oh. Oh, she's late, is she?
Sorry.
Okay. Let me see if I can find her. I'm going to have to go out of this just a second. All right. Sorry, folks. Okay, I've got her. Can you all still hear me? Okay. So the third term there, eurythmics, would be the entire concept that Dalcroze kind of tuned into. And what he would do is he would observe children either making music, moving to music, hearing it. And in the context of what I've just been doing, this would be a eurythmic reaction. Etc. So the point is that eurythmic literally means connection to the body coming from within to outside. And so from the standpoint of all of us as teachers, as musicians, as performers, as conductors, our reaction to something, we want to work as hard as we can to reach that third stage, right? We want to be eurythmic so that when we sense something, it is natural. It is an integrated part of us. Now, using the concept of the Greeks again, that it's body, it's mind, and it's spirit, so that they're all three unified in our presentation. The other thing that Dalcroze paid attention to was just observing in human movement that there were two fundamental motions. One was arsis, and the other one was thesis. So arsis, does anybody know what the term arsis, the Greek or Latin term, actually means? Somebody give it a shot. Anybody, Bueller? Well, arsis literally means rise. So in our connotation, it would be probably an upward sensation or an upward concept. And then thesis, and this isn't having to do with a term paper, but thesis then would mean the opposite. Thesis would mean downward. And so what Dalcroze observed in the movement of kids, particularly, who aren't yet, I guess, cultured or conditioned would be a better term, conditioned in the ways of whatever society they're raised in, and told how to move and how to behave and sit up straight and, those kinds of things that we all encounter when we grow up. But little kids who are 4 or 5, and the way that they moved, he detected primarily upward arsic motions with their limbs and their bodies, their legs, and then downward motions in the same way. So he also observed that in nature, our DNA, so to speak, is wrapped with examples of this. What are some examples in nature that are arsic and thetic, to vary the terms? What are some things? Yeah, Julio.
Like a tree, it grows and it grows tall.
Yeah, it grows and it grows tall. But how do you complete the cycle? How would you call it thetic?
Oh, it eventually falls down.
Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate. Um, and even your example is even much more sophisticated than what some of the things I was imagining. What are some arsic and thetic things that happen every day? I can't see most people, so either you're in
With
your
the sun,
yeah. What about the sun?
well, it rises and it sets every day.
That's right.
So that's our
So
basis.
just the regular cycle of the day, as indicated through sunrise and sunset. That is the most, I mean, obvious, probably um, natural occurrence. What's another one? And there are two or three others that are of that. I think once you think about them, you'll go, oh yeah. Anybody think of another rise and fall?
The tide.
Yes, the tide. That's the other example that I think fits exactly with that terminology. And then I mean, you could go on a long journey trying to find more, uh, I guess, sophisticated examples of this, more like what Julio was talking about. Our lives are arsic and thetic, right? I mean, we grow from a child to the point of our maturity, and some of us, I guess, are on the downside of that hill, of that arch. And then the thesis would be, the middle of life or whatever, to the point at which we no longer live. The seasons, there are seasons that are cyclical, and depending upon how you view the seasons, in terms of spring being the time of life, so January through, uh, things bloom and things flourish, and then in the middle of that cycle things start to die again and winter goes back to, anyway, that we could go over and over and over with examples like that. If you throw a ball up, so the theory of gravity is arsic and thetic. You throw a ball up, it comes back down to earth. The theory of relativity, and other sort of physics ideas are imbued with this concept. So that's what I mean by it being in our DNA. Everything we do, everything we've been raised to think, is arsic and thetic. And then so Dalcroze makes this observation, which he at the time called revelatory, or revelatory. There we go. And so obvious, like the seasons and all that, but he sees it all around him as he teaches these elementary kids to sing, and then they dance and they play, and things like that. So we go from the ancient Greeks to this concept by Dalcroze, and he's born in the 19th century and lives all the way to 1960. Well, his contemporary, and this has to do with the handout that I gave you, and it doesn't matter right now if you have it out, because I'm not going to follow it exactly as it's written anyway. But let me clear this out. So now we have and Rudolf von Laban, and so the accent, this Hungarian person's the accent on his last name is on the first syllable, Laban, not Laban, but Laban. So he was born in Hungary, and this is in your uh, handout. And he was born in 1879, and I can't remember exactly what his death date was. 1958, I think. So I'll write that down, and if I'm wrong, I'll correct it at some point. So Laban was raised as a dancer and as an educator, and he at a very early point in his career also began to observe the world around him and the way that human beings, particularly dancers, because that's the world he started in, that they related to the space in which they lived. We all live in a space, obviously, and we move through that space. But dance, of course, is a specific application of movement through time and space. So he was one of those people that, both as a dancer and as a choreographer, he began to think, okay, what does a certain motion mean, and how do I describe exactly, or as exact as possible, uh, the real gray areas of movement through time and space? And because the language was so nondescript, or it was so inapproximate, that it it was not, they weren't, move like this, or sort of like we do this, you're moving up and down, or the motion's too large, or it's too angular. So those serve us pretty well in conducting. But what is so applicable to our discussions is the specific manner and language that Leban developed for choreography. And so one of the um, things that he coined, and sorry again for my wonderful drawing here, I could do this better if I had, that's supposed to be a circle. I'm glad your sound's off so I can't hear the laughing. I'm going to try that again. Sorry. All right, let me try that again. I practiced this today, but it didn't do me any good. All right. That's a little better. There we go. That's pretty good. Okay. So Leban came up with a term describing the three-dimensional sphere that's all around us. And his concept became known as, and some of you have heard me say this before, kinesphere. And what that means is kina, meaning movement, and then the sphere around us. So the idea that there is a three-dimensional spherical, I guess, space, limited only by the Vitruvian Man of Leonardo, that drawing that shows the man and his limbs moving in a circle and showing the potential of his body movements. Laban really said that the three dimensions that we, or that dancers especially, move in is the horizontal, and that's this one. Can you see my pointer? Do you see the pointer? Can somebody say yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then you see the vertical here, and you see the sagittal, which would be like us sort of standing and moving forward or to the side, or staying standing and then moving backward off the vertical axis of our body. And this all then is surrounded by a three-dimensional space called a kinesphere. And so these are the three-dimensional elements that Leban makes use of in his discussions about the kinesphere, and then just about motion through time and space. Okay, so in addition to this concept, Laban came up with something called, oops, there are 4 effort elements. There we go. Let me spell correctly. All right, and these are the overall elements of movement through time and space, movement in the kinesphere. And they will relate directly to our discussions about, well, conducting a pattern, conducting gesture, and our motion between ictus points and around the space in which we conduct. So the continuum that each of these things has, it would be like a Likert scale, that goes from 1 to 10. But rather than, the minimal to the maximum, it would be like a scale of extremes. So I'm going to use words to describe each of these. So time's continuum is something that is very sustained or something that is very quick. And it doesn't have anything to do with direction, but only time itself. Weight, the element of weight, has to do with the most light, or the concept of the lightest sort of movement to the heaviest sort of movement. Hopefully that all makes sense. And space, the continuum would be from the most indirect motion to the most direct motion. So if you can see me and you can see my hand, can you all see it? I hope. I have nobody's face on here.
Yes.
I'm going to, great, thank you. I'm going to assume that you can. If I go from point A to point B, and I go indirectly, or I go indirectly, hopefully that concept makes sense. Whereas if I go from point A to B, the most direct way is a straight line, right? So that would be direct use of space. This would be indirect use of space. Now, perhaps you might be thinking, okay, I can see an application of that to conducting, to our gestures in all their various connotations. Flow is the effort element that affects all three. So I think the easiest way to think of flow is almost like gravity from the center of our bodies. So if flow is free, I have almost no resistance, right? So this could also be a resistance element. If I move, whatever direction I move, if it's bound, there's the most responsive, or the most resistance, if that makes sense. So almost zero resistance, free. It's like a loss of gravity, right? It's like when if you were out in space and you're tethered to a spaceship and you're floating around, that tether gets broken and you're out there drifting for eternity. That would be the ultimate free flow of motion. And the most bound would be the largest gravitational field possible in the universe, so that there was no possibility of movement. So what this all has to do with our discussion, and I think is incredibly useful, is that if we think about, okay, we're in the kinesphere and we're a three-dimensional motion, because that's how people see us in any sort of a music ensemble. They see more than a one or two-dimensional robotic motion. And back to the ancient Greek concept of integration of the mind, body, and spirit means that we are using our physical awarenesses, our athleticism, if you will. We are using our intellect, we are using our mind and awareness, and we are using the spirit, which is that maybe metaphysical part, which can't necessarily be described, but can be felt and sensed. And we are using them in equal portions in our movement, in our being, in our existence. So, and then we combine that with the Dalcroze eurythmics, and we are then drawn immediately to that third term that I brought up, and that is eurythmic, meaning that it comes from within outward, and it manifests itself in movement to music. And then finally, these Laban effort elements give us a language that we can use to describe any kind of movement in space and time. And certainly for our purposes, we can discuss conducting. So it's the effort elements in combination that is where our discipline, our conducting discipline, comes into play. For example, if I make a motion, and I'll use A to B again, and I'm going to use the time element will be quick, okay? The weight element will be light. The use of space will be indirect. And the flow element will be free. So there's almost no resistance to that. So then if you use other combinations, let's try sustained time, lightweight, and direct. So sustained time, lightweight, direct. So the weight and the flow have some, I guess, more direct relationship than the other elements, because when you're light in motion, it tends to be thought that you're more free, but there can be light that is bound as well, and there can be heavy that is free. So weight also, I think, indicates, for our purposes, it'd be sort of like that Star Wars image of that you remember from the very first one, the old first one, number 4, the first time that spaceship came over the top of the camera, and it was huge mass, but silent and free, to use a Laban term. So it can also have to do with mass in terms of weight, not necessarily with flow. So as we're working with these, I just would like you to, when you get to the handout that I scanned and sent you, hopefully it's readable, you'll read through that article that's taken from a conducting text. And then we can have a discussion on Thursday about, okay, how does this stuff apply to choral conducting? And how does it apply when we're using a pattern, when we're cueing, when we're, I think there's enormous implications for an opportunity to use this terminology and this meaning when we're talking about articulation, when we're talking about sort of as I've said to those of you in choir, kind of the metabolism of a particular piece of music. What are the subdivision issues? What are the pointillistic structural issues? What are the rhythmic ones, etc.? So there's a lot of use that we can even do in a simple piece like America the Beautiful. And actually that's where we need to start if we want to integrate these. So the aspects that I'd like you to pay attention to are, it's the last page of the handout that says Lebon action verb. Now, Lebon came up with 8 action verbs. And the action verbs simply were used as examples to shortcut language, because if you look at the chart, if you don't have it, available to you now, or it's not right there, they are combinations of the effort elements together in one activity. And so, if we float, it's indirect use of space, it's lightweight, and sustained time. And hopefully, with some of the simple little examples that I gave you, that makes sense. And then the movement example, which is really useful because it illustrates an everyday, relatable movement activity that we can all do, that uses those integrated effort elements. So treading water at various depths, that's something that pops into our mind right now. We could come up with a bunch of other kinds of things that get the float issue. Wringing a beach towel, and I think, or a a medium-sized towel or a wash rag or something. If you imagine, getting that wash rag completely wet and you wring it out, you immediately have that kinesthetic. Why don't you all try this? I can't see you all, but if you try, imagine, we've all done this 100 times, hundreds of times. It is indirect use of space, because it's not going straight from point A to point B, it's going around. It's a heavy weight and sustained time, and the flow would be bound, right? So this is a bound, heavy motion. And so if we were to go through all of these action verbs, it's an excellent movement example instructions about, okay, I get it. So hopefully some lights start to come on. So if we go to glide, there's so many, I think ice skating is a real great example, because you literally can see somebody gliding across the ice. Pushing a car, some of you that have warmed up with me in choir, we've used these kinds of physical imageries without me defining, I'm using a Lebon movement technique. But pushing, I remember several times saying, okay, push an empty Volkswagen that's in neutral, or a small box car, or a wagon, or whatever it is. And it's direct space, A to B, it's heavy weight, and it's sustained use of time. And then we could, flow is the overall. Is there resistance, or is there no resistance? So it's towards the bound, not so free. Flick. If you dust lint off from your clothes, flick at a bug, a fly or something off the desk, you see the qualities of the elements that are in combination there. Slash would be like fencing. And the interesting thing, we've also used in the choral setting, when I've asked you to move using a fencing foil or a machete or a regular sword, because there's a difference in weight and resistance, and it changes the concept of motion within the kinesphere. It changes the manner in which we relate. And then backing up and going to Dalcroze, it would mean that our reaction to a particular kind of music or a particular kind of stimulus or input would be, described in a very precise way. We have the language suddenly to, this is, less resistance, it is indirect, it is a light kind of a weight. So hopefully, like I said before, these terms are starting to make you think about a lot of the movements that you would make as a conductor, as a musician, etc. Dab and punch are, the remaining two elements, or action verbs. So what I'd like you to do is, between now and Thursday's class, I'd like you to read that article that I sent to you PDF form. And then I'd like to have a conversation about a couple of things. And I'll have a video, a short video, for us to watch and then have a little bit of a discussion. So it'll be a lot more interactive in the next session. But what I at least wanted to do today was introduce these concepts. The ancient Greek concept of balance, the Delcro's concept of eurythmics, and of course the Lebon movement theory evaluation. Now, this is the Lebon movement theory that I'm discussing with you is very basic, and we are using it in a very limited way in our discussions. One could take a course like from Dr. Cox, who is a certified Lebon specialist. And if any of you have taken any of those courses from her or attended any of her workshops, you know the specificity that she gets into and the discussions and the directions that she will go with this are much more in depth than this. Is kind of like, tip of the iceberg, or putting our little toe in the water. But even that much knowledge is going to provide us so much more specific kind of language that we will be able to describe some things and then implement them much more quickly. It's like an evaluative process, or in other connotations. If you were trying to explain the concept of, what does it feel like when the soft palate raises, for example, and you feel some energy. Well, if we take a breath like we're surprised, we can immediately feel that. And we're using imagery that everybody has experienced, everybody can relate to, and it causes involuntary muscles to do what they do based on an inner sensation. And we cut the descriptive in 1/10 probably, or we almost eliminate it because we have an experience. And that's the concept here with both the elements that Lebon uses and the action verbs, because the action verbs show the combination of these elements together, and then we can start making those applications. So can I just get either a thumbs up response or a yes? Does the basic do the basic concepts of what I presented today make sense in terms of the potential for how we could apply them to movement in conducting? Yeah, I'm getting thumbs up. I'm getting Walt Disney, whoever that is. Who is Walt Disney?
It's me, Garrett.
It's Garrett, okay. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there because I have to drop this laptop off for my wife's class. But that's a good start. And then it'll become a little more practical in our next classroom discussion after you've read that article, and then we have some more discussion, okay? So I'm sorry for my mistake this morning about, tying on to a different session, but this is being recorded, and other than the initial awkwardness that I showed when we got started, all the information is something that you could view again because I've put it on my YouTube channel. Okay, so thanks everybody, and I'll see you on Thursday. Bye bye.